They were never gods. They only made sure you believed they were. Long before the stories of Genesis were ever told, before the pyramids reached for the sky or the stars were mapped by priest kings, there were beings who came from beyond. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens to earth. And whether you see them as ancient astronauts, fallen angels, or something in between, one truth remains. Their presence shaped the very roots of human civilization, and their legacy has never truly left us. Everything you were taught about human origins, about divine beings and sacred myths, was carefully curated to keep one thing hidden: that these were not gods to be worshipped, but entities with agendas, technologies, and powers we barely understand. The stories were rewritten, the symbols buried, and what remained was only what they allowed. A world where you forgot who you were and who they really were. What if everything you believe about where we come from is a carefully constructed illusion? What if the origin of humanity, as told by scientists and theologians alike, is missing the most vital piece? Not by accident, but by design. The earliest known civilization to write anything down, the Sumerians, didn't speak of evolution or divine creation in the way we've come to accept. They spoke of sky beings, the Anunnaki, not in poetic metaphor, not as distant gods hidden in the clouds, but as real, physical beings who came to Earth with purpose. According to these ancient tablets, written thousands of years before the Bible, the Anunnaki didn't just influence humanity, they made us. You're told we emerged from apes through slow, chaotic evolution. Random mutations, natural selection, survival of the fittest. And yet suddenly, around 200,000 years ago, modern Homo sapiens appeared, fully formed, with language capacity, spiritual instinct, and the ability to build, farm, organize, and worship. That kind of leap doesn't just happen. No other species on Earth has experienced anything like it. The gap between what came before us and what we became is a chasm science still can't fully explain. But the Sumerians had an answer. According to their records, the Anunnaki came to Earth in search of gold, a vital element, not just for wealth, but for sustaining their planet's atmosphere and energy systems. Finding early hominids here, they saw potential, but not usefulness. So they intervened. They didn't simply enslave us, they re-engineered us. Enki and Ninhursag, two prominent Anunnaki figures, are said to have combined their own essence with that of the primitive human species. The result, a genetically altered human, capable of thought, language, obedience, and labor. You won't hear this in a classroom. You won't see it in a Sunday sermon. Because this version of our past doesn't position us as miraculous, God-chosen beings or noble survivors of nature. It positions us as a created species, modified by outsiders, and possibly still watched. This is the part they don't want you to ask about. It strips away the illusion that our governments, religions, or institutions have all the answers. Because the moment you start questioning where we really come from, you start questioning everything that followed. Who wrote our history? Who benefits from what we believe? The Sumerians weren't alone. Similar creation stories echo through other ancient cultures, stories of gods descending from the stars, mixing their seed with humans, teaching us the arts of civilization. In the book of Genesis, the sons of God took wives from the daughters of men. In ancient Egypt, divine bloodlines ruled for generations. In the Mahabharata and other Vedic texts, beings descended in flying crafts called Vimanas and intervened in human affairs. Different names, same pattern. Different myths, same message. And still, we're told it's all allegory, stories, coincidences, anything but fact. But what if those stories were never meant to be taken as metaphor? What if they were preserved not as myths, but as warnings? There's a reason why mainstream academia avoids the Anunnaki. There's a reason ancient tablets like the Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis are rarely discussed outside obscure lectures or fringe forums. Because once you allow the possibility that the Anunnaki were real, you open the door to the most forbidden truth of all. That humanity is not the pinnacle of creation, but the result of ancient intervention. And that changes everything. Some knowledge, though, runs too deep for platforms like this. If you want access to more of what can't be spoken here, join our free newsletter, Insights Academy, via the link in the description, and for a limited time, you'll also receive a free copy of the Kybalion when you sign up. Because the truth is not only deeper than you think, it's been waiting, buried in plain sight. And now that you've glimpsed the edges of it, the real journey begins. Not into outer space, but into the suppressed archives of our past. The question is no longer whether the Anunnaki existed. The question is, what part of you did they design, and why? They didn't come down in robes of light. They didn't float through the clouds playing harps or whispering divine wisdom. The Sumerians didn't describe their gods with the mystery and metaphor we've come to expect. They were clear, matter-of-fact, almost clinical. The Anunnaki were sky beings, flesh and blood entities who arrived from the heavens in ships of fire and thunder. And when they landed, they didn't just observe humanity from afar. They intervened, ruled, and forever altered the course of our species. The name Anunnaki translates roughly to those who from the heavens came to earth. They were said to descend from a place called Nibiru, a mysterious celestial body described in the tablets as part of our solar system, though hidden from modern view. According to Sumerian records, the Anunnaki were not a mythological pantheon, but a royal family of advanced beings with a clear hierarchy, individual personalities, and internal conflicts. They had politics, rivalries, and roles, not unlike the rulers of Earth they later shaped in their image. At the head of this hierarchy were figures like Anu, the Sky Father, the sovereign ruler of Nibiru, Enlil, the strict and often harsh enforcer of order, and Enki, the genetic scientist and more sympathetic figure toward humanity. Enki, according to many texts, was responsible for designing us, modifying early hominids to serve the needs of the Anunnaki. But he didn't just create us as machines. Some say he embedded within us a piece of something divine, something the others feared. Enki's counterpart, Enlil, on the other hand, is often portrayed as humanity's oppressor, enraged by our growing independence, disturbed by our spiritual potential. It was Enlil, according to the Atrahasis epic, who ordered the Great Flood to wipe out humans when they became too noisy, too aware. Enki, in defiance, warned a human, Ziusudra, much like the biblical Noah, and ensured the survival of our kind. This wasn't mythology. This was war between higher beings, and we were the battlefield. Different cultures have remembered them differently. In Babylon, they were the gods of power and empire. In Egypt, the divine pharaohs claimed to carry their blood. In Mesoamerican civilizations, the sky serpents and bearded gods brought astronomy, architecture, and law. Everywhere they went, the Anunnaki, or beings like them, left behind two things: the sudden rise of civilization and the stories of beings descending from the sky. But who were they really? Were they extraterrestrials from a hidden planet, interdimensional architects of form and matter, or were they something else entirely? Advanced entities beyond the human mind's full grasp. What matters more than their origin is their influence. They didn't just give us tools and symbols. They gave us structure, society, religion, royalty, law, and perhaps most importantly, they gave us hierarchy. The belief that some are born above and others below. That knowledge belongs to the few. That obedience is sacred. In many ways, the world we live in is still Anunnaki in design. The gods may no longer walk among us, but their systems do. The vertical power structure, the reverence for divine rulers, the suppression of knowledge beneath ceremony and control. These are not organic evolutions. They were taught, implanted, and protected by myths that made it dangerous to question. Because to question the Anunnaki is to question every god who ever demanded your loyalty. Every institution that said it spoke on your behalf. Every story that claimed you were small, sinful, or broken from birth. And maybe that's why these beings were remembered not just as creators, but as deceivers. They gave us fire and made us kneel for it. The more you learn, the more the veil begins to thin, and what you find behind it is not a fantasy, but a history too uncomfortable for the modern world to acknowledge. Because if these beings were real, and they did shape us, the next question isn't just who they were, it's whether they ever truly left. Civilization didn't slowly emerge from scattered tribes and simple tools. It erupted. Practically overnight, complex societies appeared. Agriculture, city planning, mathematics, astronomy, laws, priesthoods, language systems, even large-scale architecture. The official narrative struggles to explain how nomadic humans suddenly developed everything required to build and govern cities like Ur, Eridu, and Babylon. But the ancient Sumerians didn't leave it up for debate. They told us who brought it, the Anunnaki. According to the tablets, these beings didn't just visit, they stayed. They ruled, governed, instructed. Each Anunnaki god was assigned a city, a purpose, and a dominion over specific human affairs. Enki taught the secrets of water and agriculture. Ninhursag guided the healing arts and biology. Enlil handed down laws and political structures. They didn't merely give us information, they constructed the very fabric of civilization. But with every gift, there was a leash. The Sumerians didn't see their relationship with the Anunnaki as one of love and light. They described servitude, expectation, duty. Humans were created, in the words of the ancient texts, to bear the load of the gods. We weren't made for freedom. We were made for function. The sudden rise of farming, calendar systems, ritual worship, and labor isn't just a coincidence of progress. It's a sign of design, a system installed. This is the part the mainstream always avoids, because it forces us to ask the uncomfortable question: were the Anunnaki our benefactors or our overseers? They gave us laws, but demanded loyalty. They gave us temples, but insisted on worship. They brought knowledge, but locked it in priesthoods and hierarchies. And while some among them, like Enki, may have tried to elevate humanity, the overarching system was not built to empower, it was built to control. Look closely, and you'll see the fingerprints of this control in nearly every ancient culture. In Egypt, knowledge was held by a priest class who served the gods. In India, a rigid caste system defined one's role and worth. In Mesoamerica, rulers claimed divine right through bloodlines tied to celestial beings. Everywhere, the same pattern emerges. Power flows downward from a divine source, and obedience is the price of belonging. The Anunnaki model wasn't just spiritual, it was structural. It embedded itself into our architecture, our governance, even our daily routines. Cities were built around temples, not people. Time was measured by rituals, not nature. Food production, language, even marriage, all shaped by doctrines passed down from above. And so humanity stepped into a role it never volunteered for, servant to a system it didn't create. But this wasn't just physical control, it was psychological. The Anunnaki didn't just want workers, they wanted loyalty, reverence, the kind that can only come from belief. So they became gods. They wrapped their technology in mystery, their power in ritual, their agendas in prophecy. And over generations, their presence faded, but their systems remained. We inherited the scaffolding of their rule and called it progress. Think of what was lost. Humanity had its own natural rhythms, its own connection to the earth, its own intuitive spirituality. But those ways were overwritten. The world became divided, externalized, hierarchical. Spirituality became obedience, community became class, wisdom became doctrine, and the gods smiled from above, while we forgot who we were below. This is not a call to demonize the past. It's a call to remember it clearly. Because until we confront what was given and what was taken, we'll keep mistaking control for culture and servitude for sacredness. The Anunnaki may have helped build our world, but not for us, for them. You've been told the past is behind you, that the stories of ancient gods have nothing to do with the systems you live under today. But the truth is, the blueprint the Anunnaki left behind didn't vanish with the temples, It was inherited, copied, and modernized. What once required thrones and rituals now hides behind office desks, courtrooms, and corporations. But the architecture of control, it's the same. The vertical structure of power, the idea that some are born to rule and others are born to serve, was seeded in the early temples of Mesopotamia. The concept of divine kingship, passed down from the heavens, was the Anunnaki's way of installing earthly rulers who acted as their proxies. This wasn't governance by the people. It was management by bloodline, sanctioned from the stars. And it worked. It works still. Today we don't bow before Enlil or Anu, but we follow systems built in their image. Presidents, CEOs, religious figures, they all operate within a hierarchy rooted in ancient control. Modern politics is theater on a very old stage. The symbols have changed, the titles have shifted, but the structure is intact. There is always a ruling class, a priesthood of knowledge, and a working population bound by invisible chains, law, debt, belief. The financial system? Another layer of the design. The Sumerians were the first to invent currency and contracts. Coincidence or necessity? You control people more efficiently through numbers than you ever could through swords. Modern economies are governed not by truth, but by trust. Trust in a system built to benefit the few. Elites who trace their power through legacy, secrecy, and lineage. The divine right of kings has simply become the silent privilege of dynasties. Religion plays its part too. Organized doctrines echo the priesthoods of old, repeating sacred stories while keeping their full meanings hidden. Layers of symbolism, only understood by the initiated, passed down through mystery schools and secret societies. The gods were replaced by saints, the rituals adjusted for new empires, but the energy is the same. Worship, sacrifice, obedience, a narrow path sold as salvation. And behind the curtain, silence, control. Even education isn't safe from this blueprint. Children are trained to recite, repeat, conform, rarely to question. Creativity is boxed in. Intuition is dismissed. The goal isn't to ignite minds, but to shape them. And when you follow the trail far enough, you'll find that many institutions of knowledge trace their lineage back to ancient systems of control, wrapped in modern terms like academic excellence or standardized success. The Anunnaki's influence didn't vanish. It was institutionalized, encoded into every layer of society until the structure itself became invisible. So you go to school, get a job, pay taxes, obey laws, and never once ask, where did this framework come from? Why does power always trickle down? Why is it taboo to question the roots of authority? Because that's the genius of the system. It trains you to protect it, to ridicule anything that challenges the narrative, to mock ancient knowledge while kneeling before artificial intelligence, to call yourself free while living on a leash you can't even see. It's not oppression in chains, it's programming in comfort. And the ones pulling the strings don't need to show their faces anymore. They wrote the blueprint, set it loose, and let it run itself. But here's the twist. They didn't just program society. They programmed your beliefs, your sense of possibility, your perception of history. And until you unlearn their story, you can never fully reclaim your own. The Anunnaki didn't just build cities, laws, and kingdoms. They encoded something far more powerful, knowledge. But not the kind you find in textbooks or temples. This was sacred knowledge, hidden in symbols, embedded in stories, passed down through rituals and mystery schools. Not meant for the masses, but for the few. Because information is power, and real power has always been about what's kept hidden, not what's revealed. Look closely, and you'll see it everywhere. In the geometry of ancient temples, in the alignment of sacred sites to celestial bodies, in the recurring numbers, the mirrored myths, the silent patterns that whisper through history. From the spirals of Mesopotamian art to the architecture of Egyptian pyramids, from the chakra systems of the East to the hermetic principles of the West, it's all part of the same code. A language of consciousness, a map of reality. The Sumerians weren't just record keepers. They were translators of cosmic law. They spoke of the me, divine decrees or energetic laws that governed not just society, but existence itself. These weren't rules for behavior, they were principles of creation, like the Hermetic laws described thousands of years later. As above, so below, the principle of vibration, the law of polarity. And those laws weren't invented, they were remembered, preserved, protected, because they are the mechanisms of the universe, and whoever understands them can bend reality to their will. This is where the story of the Anunnaki shifts from historical to spiritual. Because these beings didn't just manipulate genes, they manipulated frequency, consciousness, perception. They understood that reality is not just physical, but vibrational. That thought creates form. That belief shapes the outcome. And that if you can control what a being believes, you can control what that being experiences. So they didn't just engineer humanity. They engineered belief systems. They embedded their story in religion, myth, and archetype, making themselves gods, hiding universal truth beneath divine drama. They gave humanity rituals that mimic true spiritual practices, but without the keys. Symbols without context. Power without access. And so, humanity forgot not just who the Anunnaki were, but who they themselves were meant to become. The knowledge wasn't lost, it was hidden, preserved in ancient texts, sacred geometry, initiatory traditions, and cryptic metaphors. It appears in the Kybalion, in Gnostic texts, in the Emerald Tablets. It whispers through tarot, alchemy, astrology, but always just out of reach for the average seeker. Because this knowledge was dangerous to those who built systems on ignorance. What they feared wasn't rebellion, it was remembrance. Because a human being who understands the true nature of consciousness becomes ungovernable. That kind of awareness dissolves hierarchy, shatters control, and rewrites the script from within. That kind of human doesn't obey, they create. And that's the one thing the old gods couldn't tolerate. But here's the beauty of it. You were never meant to stay asleep. The code is still here. The clues have survived. And if you follow them, if you study the patterns, if you question the myths and listen to your inner knowing, you begin to unlock what was always yours. You don't need a temple. You don't need permission. You need awareness, discipline, and the courage to unlearn what they taught you to believe. The Anunnaki didn't just give humanity civilization, they left behind a test. Would we stay in the cage, mesmerized by stories and blinded by worship? Or would we decode the truth, reclaim the knowledge, and rise, not as servants, but as creators? The more you learn about the Anunnaki, the harder it becomes to place them in a neat box. Were they gods, engineers, saviors, slavers? The ancient texts don't tell a simple story of good versus evil. They tell a fractured tale of rivalry, rebellion, and dual agendas. The Anunnaki weren't a unified force. They were divided, and humanity was caught in the middle. At the heart of this division were two brothers, Enki and Enlil, both sons of Anu, the supreme ruler of their world, but with very different visions for ours. Enki, the scientist, the architect of humanity, was said to be compassionate, curious, and perhaps even protective of his creation. He saw potential in humans, something sacred, something worth preserving. Enlil, on the other hand, saw us as tools, resources, a means to an end. To him, we were noisy, rebellious, flawed, a mistake that needed managing or removing. These weren't abstract differences. They played out in the oldest stories ever written. When humanity grew too numerous, too loud, too independent, it was Enlil who called for our destruction. It was Enlil who unleashed the flood to reset the experiment. And it was Enki who warned one man, Ziusudra, ensuring that humanity would survive. Sound familiar? Because thousands of years later, the same story was retold in the book of Genesis, with the names changed, the gods hidden, but the structure intact. This duality runs deeper than myth. It reflects the tension that still exists in the world today. One force that seeks to control, to limit, to dominate, and another that seeks to awaken, to liberate, to evolve. Both are embedded in our systems, our stories, and even our psyche. Because whether or not you believe in ancient sky beings, you live in a world shaped by their legacy, a world where control is disguised as order, and freedom is framed as chaos. It's tempting to view the Anunnaki as villains, as enslavers who hijacked a planet and bent its native species to their will. And there is evidence, linguistic, architectural, symbolic, that supports this interpretation. But it's just as possible that within their ranks were rebels, whistleblowers, protectors. That not all Anunnaki agreed with the plan. That some of them, like Enki, planted seeds of resistance, coded into our DNA and myths, waiting for us to remember. Because maybe the real story isn't about them. Maybe it's about us, about whether we remain caught in the legacy of division or learn to integrate both sides of our inheritance, the programmed obedience and the divine spark, the shadow and the light, the creator and the rebel. If Enki saw something in us worth saving, maybe that's because he saw what we've forgotten, that we are not just modified primates, crafted for servitude. We are vessels of consciousness, capable of memory, choice, and transformation. We are the unfinished story, the part of the equation that was never meant to follow the script. And if that's true, then the narrative shifts. The Anunnaki weren't gods or devils. They were catalysts. They introduced complexity, duality, conflict, and then they stepped back, or were forced to, leaving us to write the next chapter. The chapter where we decide who we truly are, not in their image, but in our own. If they came once, who's to say they won't come again? That question has haunted researchers, spiritualists, and ancient cultures for thousands of years. Because for many, the Anunnaki story doesn't end with their departure. It continues with a promise or a warning of their return. The Sumerians never said the Anunnaki left for good. In fact, their texts suggest they were cyclical visitors, appearing at specific intervals tied to celestial events. The concept of Nibiru, a mysterious planet or celestial body associated with the Anunnaki, is often mentioned as having an elongated orbit, one that brings it into Earth's vicinity every few thousand years. Mainstream science dismisses this as a myth, yet modern astronomers have quietly begun discussing the possibility of an undiscovered Planet 9 on the edge of our solar system. Coincidence or breadcrumb? Ancient prophecies across cultures seem to echo the same theme. Beings from the sky, who came once and will return when the stars align. The Hopi speak of star brothers. The Dogon tribe of Mali hold complex astronomical knowledge they attribute to visitors from Sirius. The Mayan calendar marked great cycles of return, and even the Bible warns of gods descending from the heavens in the final days. Could these stories all be describing the same event, using different language? Some believe the Anunnaki never left, that they simply stepped back, concealed themselves, or operate on planes of existence our senses can't yet perceive, that their influence is still here, only hidden behind the faces of world leaders, bloodlines, secret societies. Others think they remain distant, observing, waiting for the right moment to return, not as saviors, not as tyrants, but as a test. Because if they do return, what will they find? A humanity still asleep, worshipping false idols, obeying systems built in their image? Or a species awakening to its sovereignty, ready to meet them as equals rather than subjects? That's the real question. Maybe the Anunnaki aren't just external beings from another planet, but symbolic reflections of something deeper. The forces of evolution, transformation, reckoning. Their return might not look like spaceships descending over cities. It might look like a mass awakening, a collapse of the false systems, a remembering of what was buried. Maybe their return is already happening, through dreams, intuition, DNA activation, and the collective call to something greater. Think about the time we're living in, the rapid collapse of old structures, the exposure of secrets, the hunger for meaning beyond materialism, the rise of spiritual consciousness, metaphysics, and ancient wisdom coming back into focus. These aren't random. They're signals. Birth pangs of a species preparing for something it can't fully explain, but feels in its bones. We're not waiting for the Anunnaki to return. We're preparing to meet them, consciously. Because if they appear again, physically or symbolically, they won't be looking for slaves or worshippers. They'll be looking for those who remembered, those who broke the programming, those who saw through the illusion of hierarchy and reclaimed their place in the cosmic conversation. The return isn't about them, it's about us. Are we ready? From the moment you took your first breath, the forgetting began. Not because you were weak or flawed or incapable, but because the world you were born into was built to make you forget. Forget the truth of who you are. Forget the origins of your species. Forget the codes embedded in your blood and the ancient echoes still pulsing in your dreams. You weren't just taught facts, you were conditioned with beliefs. And belief, more than knowledge, shapes reality. You were told we came from nothing, a cosmic accident. Cells, then fish, then monkeys, then humans. No design, no purpose, no higher intelligence. Just chaos dressed up as science. And if that story didn't fit, there was another one waiting, about divine creation by a distant, untouchable God who made you separate from him, forever beneath. Either way, the message was the same. You're small, you're powerless, and the best you can do is obey the rules, fit the mold, and wait your turn to die. But the ancient texts tell a different story, one where humans were made in the image of something far greater than we've been told, but not for freedom, for service, for control. The Anunnaki didn't give us full autonomy. They gave us just enough to function, not enough to rebel. Yet somehow, the spark got through. A glitch in the program, a fragment of something they couldn't fully suppress. Consciousness, soul, the blueprint of awakening. And that's why so much of your life has been spent in distraction. Entertainment designed to numb, schooling designed to mold, religion designed to shame. A world obsessed with external validation so you never stop to listen to the quiet voice inside that still remembers. Because the greatest threat to the system is not revolution, it's remembrance. A human who remembers they are more than flesh is a danger to everything built to contain them. But you're starting to remember, aren't you? The cracks are forming. The systems feel hollow. The stories no longer hold. Something ancient stirs within you. Not fear, but recognition. A feeling that all the myths, all the symbols, all the dreams you couldn't explain are pieces of a larger puzzle. One the Anunnaki never wanted you to complete. Because when you remember, you no longer need permission. You no longer worship the gods. They become mirrors, not masters. You begin to see the rituals for what they are, the hierarchies for what they've always been. Distractions, illusions of control, echoes of a system that only survives if you remain asleep. But this is where the story changes. Not because a savior arrives, but because you do. You wake up, you choose to seek, you begin to question every inherited belief, every unquestioned ritual, every whispered command. You stop asking for freedom and start embodying it. And that is when the old world begins to tremble. You weren't just meant to forget. You were meant to awaken. At the right time, in the right body, with the right fire burning inside you. This is that time. Because the ones who remember aren't just resisting, they're rebuilding. And the real battle isn't between light and dark, good and evil, gods and mortals. It's between forgetting and knowing. And the moment you choose to know, the chains fall. You were never meant to worship them. You were meant to surpass them. The Anunnaki didn't build temples so you could know the divine. They built them so you'd forget it lived inside you. They wrote themselves into the sky, the stone, the story, so deeply that even when they left, the world would still kneel at their feet. But the real power wasn't in their symbols. It was in your silence. And now, that silence is ending. You see, the true legacy of the Anunnaki isn't just encoded in ancient tablets. It's etched into your bones, your blood, your being. The myth was never just about gods descending from the sky. It was about what they saw in you, something they couldn't replicate, something they feared, not your strength, not your servitude, your potential. They gave you just enough to function, but buried the rest under layers of control, fear, and false identity. But here's the secret they couldn't erase. Your memory isn't just mental, it's spiritual. And no matter how many lifetimes they bury you beneath, the soul remembers. That's why you're here now. That's why you've always felt something pulling at the edges of your reality, like a dream you can't shake. This isn't new information, it's ancient memory returning, breaking through the cracks in the illusion. You are not just a product of evolution. You are not just a servant of systems. You are a consciousness wrapped in form, a spark that defies programming. And the moment you choose to stop accepting what you've been told, you begin to access what they tried to keep from you. Not rebellion for the sake of it, not blind resistance, but sacred remembrance. The quiet, unshakable knowing that you were never powerless to begin with. And this isn't just personal, it's planetary. The world is shifting fast. Institutions are collapsing. Lies are surfacing. Truth is no longer a whisper, it's a wave. And those who are still clinging to the illusion are being shaken. But you're waking up. Not because it's easy, because it's necessary. Because the old world can't hold what you've become. It wasn't designed to. That's why it's falling apart. This is the moment you stop asking for answers outside of yourself. This is the moment you stop seeking gods in the sky and start listening to the divine frequency already vibrating within you. You are the myth and the mirror, the question and the key, the one the stories were always pointing to, not a spectator, not a believer, a creator. So don't just remember the Anunnaki, remember yourself. The part of you that watched the stars long before you had words for them. The part of you that never fully bowed. The part of you that knew this world could be more. That part is still alive. And it's not waiting for disclosure or permission. It's waiting for you to rise. Because if you do, everything changes. You stop living inside their history and start creating your own. You stop playing roles in their script and begin writing a new one from the inside out. One that isn't about control, but about consciousness. One that doesn't recycle the past, but reclaims the future. This is the moment. Not just to know, but to act. Not just to awaken, but to remember who you were before the forgetting. Who you are now, who you came here to become. And if you're still listening, still reading, still here, then you already know this was never just about them. It was always about you. Don't miss what comes next. Sign up for Insights Academy using the link in the description and receive your free copy of the Kybalion while it's still available. Because knowledge is only power if you claim it. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."